Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Automating IPAM in your hybrid cloud with Infoblox. Before we get started with the presentation, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers and let you know that we'll be recording today's webinar, so it will be made available to everyone afterward. If at any time you're having trouble hearing us, please let us know using the chat feature on your WebEx dashboard. We have two speakers joining us today. Nick Colyer is the Practice Manager of Cloud Management and Automation at AHEAD, and in his role, Nick specializes in virtualization, orchestration, and cloud technologies. Today, Nick will be walking us through an introduction of AHEAD's cloud delivery platform and the hybrid cloud approach. Matt Gowarty is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Infoblox, and in his role, Matt focuses on cloud, virtualization, and data center automation. During this webinar, Matt will be presenting on the Infoblox product suite and how it fits into AHEAD's hybrid cloud model. Following the webinar, both Nick and Matt are available for a Q&A session. If you have questions throughout, please submit them via chat, and I'll be monitoring and submitting these questions to the speakers during their Q&A. Now let's get started. Nick, take it away.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks everyone for joining. We continue this hybrid cloud series of webinars, and people are saying they're very useful. And the goal is, give an overview and show you integrations as quickly as possible. So today we're going to go quickly through the AHEAD cloud delivery platform, just to level set for everyone, how we go about building hybrid cloud, the tool sets involved, etc. Matt Gowarty is going to go through the Infoblox overview. So if you know anyone not familiar with Infoblox, it's a great way to get familiar there. And then the goal is, we're going to show you some live demos. We'll kind of explore the Infoblox API and the vRealize plugins that Infoblox makes available. We'll be a live demo, so fingers crossed everything stays up for us, and we'll be free to answer questions and explore further if we have time at the end. So with that said, let me kind of get started in what we call the AHEAD cloud delivery platform. And this is really around customer demand going into 2016 has all been focused around how do they change the way they operate IT? How do we simplify IT, accelerate service delivery, increase transparency, all the costs of the business, particularly now that most of our customers have some public cloud component. How do you manage that? And the goal as we kind of set out for 2016 to build out our teams was really around alignment around this. How do we deliver apps and services to the business? And therefore, how do we take into account enterprise service management, cloud management, mobility, and data center infrastructure? And pretty much all of our customers now are following this model as they look to change the way they deliver IT. One of the things I always like to start off with is just why are companies going down this journey in the first place? And cloud is an answer to this problem, right? You fill out a request form or a Word document or whatever it might be, a ServiceNow ticket, and then it gets kind of passed around between teams, right? It's sort of like passing this piece of paper around where everybody does their piece of work. Now, that work might take 5 minutes, might take 30 minutes. Ultimately, though, it just creates this lag in time where you're trying to get the request of the service they requested. So the goal is to really eliminate this problem, and that's why we go down the cloud journey. What I do like to do also, before we kind of get into the tool sets, is just what do we mean by cloud? Let's just define it, because that term is used, as everyone probably knows, by every vendor today. It's a huge buzzword. So what do we mean, and how does AHEAD approach it? Ultimately, when we think of cloud, we don't just mean public cloud in this context. We have our cloud service models, so that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And primarily what you'll see in the demos today is focused around infrastructure as a service, because you're still controlling that infrastructure lower down the stack. And that's a common way that we still see, customers start out while they look at embracing PaaS and SaaS as well. Then we have our cloud deployment models, private, public. Hybrid is the go-to model now. It's been established. That's our model going forward. So whenever we approach a methodology now for deploying workloads, whether it's on-premises or in the public cloud, we don't want to have two completely separate ways of doing things. And so we definitely focus on a hybrid model. Ultimately, though, it comes down to the essential cloud characteristics that you see on the right-hand side. Self-service, heavily automated, lots of pooling of resources. Can I expand as and when I need to? So elasticity might mean a horizontal scaling application. It may just mean that, it takes you a long time to get infrastructure, and having a public cloud accessible is helpful to you. And then measured and metered. We talk about this all the time now. How do we show the true cost of IT back to the business? What we do at AHEAD then is we approach that. We take those cloud models, and we talk about building a meaningful cloud, because again, there's no point in just buying a tool, buying a cloud management tool, buying an OpenStack, a vRealize, etc., and they're not really making it meaningful to your business. And when we say a meaningful cloud, it really has to take into account the following following key things. So enterprise service management, this is one area they had where we focus heavily around ServiceNow, but we integrate with others too, CA, BMC, etc. How do we take into account change control, ticketing, incidents, all those things that have to happen? High degree of automation orchestration. And then really when we look at public cloud and data center infrastructure, they become part of your cloud. If you go to Amazon and consume an EC2 VM, that's Amazon's done their job, right? They've given you their service that they wanted to give you. That's not enough for you to give to your customers of IT. You have to layer on all your application configurations, antivirus, monitoring, other agents, security requirements, etc. And so when we think of your cloud, really public cloud becomes part of the cloud you're going to offer and the cloud services you offer to your customers. Same with data center infrastructure. And then finally, last but not least, the business requirements and show back, charge back. All of this has to revolve around business and how do we build services that are truly meaningful to them in the cloud environment. So with that said, that defined, how do we actually go and build this? How do we create this, lovely portal that we can present to people and they can go and consume cloud services? We break it down into three main tool sets. So we have our cloud lifecycle management, orchestration, which is where we're going to have a high degree of focus today with the Infoblox integrations we're here to talk about, and configuration management. If we look at the cloud management platform, and you'll see a very similar slide from Matt later on, just when we looked at Infoblox and their approach to kind of service delivery, it aligns so well with the way we approach cloud management platform. We have to have a requester, an approver, whether it's for CPU's memory, whether it's for IP addresses, backups, all these things that have to happen. How do we simplify all of that, and how do we integrate, take into account, again, enterprise service management to truly streamline these processes. When we get down to provision and retire, this is where we ultimately hand off to our orchestration tool. So in the demos today, we're going to be using vRealize Automation as the cloud management platform. We're going to be using vRealize Orchestrator as your orchestration tool. So vRealize Automation will hand off to vRealize Orchestrator to do all of those provisioning tasks. So one of those key ones is obviously getting an IP address amongst many others that you have to configure in your data center. We always say, if you're going to automate the provisioning step, you should automate the retirement step at exactly the same time. This ensures it's more efficient and ensures you've taken care of the provision in there as well. In that middle phase, which I'll hit on shortly as well, is configuration management. That's your puppets, your chefs, SaltStack, Ansible, PowerShell, DSC. There's a reason we've built a big team around those technologies that are ahead. It's just we see that as a major problem in data centers, inconsistent configurations across virtual machines, and that helps address that. So with that said, that's the cloud management. Now we move into orchestration. What does the handoff really look like? And you could go and just say, I'm going to hand off to a PowerShell script or some other script and write it all out. Our approach is more similar to kind of microservices in the software development world. You're going to build a bunch of Lego bricks, if you think of them in that way, and stitch them together in the workflows you want. And as you can probably see just in a couple of the examples here, look at the first one. We've got request IP, update DNS, configure an F5, update backups. Before we can do any of those things, we have to get an IP address, and that's often a very slow point in a lot of IT businesses that we talk to, and again that's kind of somewhere where Infoblox plays, as you'll see very shortly. With orchestration, if you think about all those tasks that you kind of see there as things largely outside of the virtual machine, the last thing we typically do with the orchestration workflows is hand off to configuration management. So we might install, say, a Puppet agent and then assign a Puppet role. And what configuration management ultimately allows us to do is assign these various modules to the server. So when I talk about role assignment, if we think of Puppet modules, we might have a module, the Windows team would still say, okay, I know how to build Windows servers well. I know how I want to operate my Windows environment. I'm going to take the standards and procedures for those. SQL team says, okay, I know how to build SQL. These are my options. These are my variables that the user can put in. And then you can have various security policies as well. And ultimately, we take those modules, very similar to the orchestration approach, but now in configuration management, and we take those and we assign those into a role. So in this case, this could be a SQL server, and that basically is what the orchestration tool assigns. What it looks like in practice is something more like this. Instead of our archaic scroll, somebody can be on an iPad, iPhone, laptop, whatever, can be in the project meeting, agreeing the specifications of the machine, or it could be a developer that has self-service access to spin up services. But ultimately, request your service, it's going to go off, and the orchestration tool is going to touch all these systems. Again, Infoblox being a clear example early on in the workflow, Active Directory, and there's typically 10 or 15 of these that in most of our customers' environments. We look for things to eliminate. We don't just want to automate old processes for the sake of it. Our goal is just to, get through this phase so that we can hand off again to configuration management and assign the role to the server. And we rinse and repeat that process for every single service that we put in the service catalog. Occasionally your orchestration workflows may change if you switch out your backup product, for example, but largely they stay the same. And once you've kind of built out that level of automation, then the value kind of is really up the stack now. Now you can just build Puppet modules, chef recipes, whatever your tool is in configuration management, and assign various configurations to your servers. One thing I also like to point out, is no two clouds are the same. We took a sample of some of our customers here that you can kind of see, and healthcare, financial, energy, and there's all different technologies that we stitch together. When we kind of think of my team at a head, with a glue that kind of ties everything together across public, on-premises, all the policy things that have to be applied. Again, one thing in common when we just set out to look at this is just almost all of our customers today are embracing something like Infoblox. They need an IPAM system because managing spreadsheets isn't the answer. Finally, I'll kind of leave with our head reference architecture. Recently updated in 2016 as well. We put a much larger emphasis on security, identity, and access management. It was always a big component, but just with the proliferation of public cloud, that's become a big component. And today, really, when we think of the layers and what we're focused on here, Infoblox really fits into that orchestration and process automation layer and the physical infrastructure, obviously, below. Our goal is let's make that as simple as possible so we can focus, up the stack and truly build out these cloud services. Finally, as far as, customers always ask me, what's the journey? How do I get started with this? And the goal isn't, we hear DevOps all the time, and we're certainly working with a number of customers on DevOps initiatives today. And how, if you've built out this infrastructure automation, how do you kind of front that with your DevOps tools, things like Jenkins, Bamboo, etc. We do a lot of work there. But before you can get there, you have to build out all of those Lego bricks, all of those building blocks to get you going. And the first phase is really what we call, plumbing phase, foundation phase. Still looking for a better name for it. So if anyone has one, feel free to submit that as well. But the goal is that when we launch a cloud, again, whether that service is on premises or in public cloud, we want to launch with fully automated OS requests, right? So there's all of those workflows for provisioning the workload and all of those workflows for retirement of the workload. And in this phase would be things like building out Infoblox, building out things like Puppet, building vRealize Orchestrator, training people up. And it's really an investment. That's what we tell our customers. You can't get a cloud in 30 days. If you could pre-package this and put it in your data center, it would be super easy, and there wouldn't be a need for the amount of automation that we do today. But we know that's not reality. When people put these cloud management platforms in, they've got to build out these modules, got to build out these workflows to get to that point. But after you reach that point, engineers are more motivated. They're excited about all the new skills and et cetera they're going to learn. And then, the acceleration really ramps up at that point. We see all sorts of different cool ideas coming out of customers, self-healing data center workflows. We see a lot of day two operations where, users can power off their VMs themselves, but they can actually take some out of monitoring as well so people don't get alerts. And it's just a lot that can be done. And so when you kind of get to that launch phase, it, truly is exciting because you've really started to change the way you operate IT. And so with that said, I'm going to kind of pass the ball over to Matt here. That was kind of a journey through the hybrid cloud model. I'm going to let Matt kind of give an overview of Infoblox and the platform before we kind of dig into the demos. So let me quickly do that.
Sounds great, Nick. And while you pass the ball over, I'll take control. I was really excited when we started doing the presentation and when the head reached out to us to talk about doing a cloud-based approach and some of the challenges that we see and what Infoblox can bring to the table with this capability. You really wanted to focus on some of the things that a lot of people often forget about. You mentioned kind of the word plumbing, some of the basic things we normally do. We often forget about some of the challenges. And before we go through the demo, I just wanted to bring those up to give a little bit more attention to talk about some of the different issues that we see when we deal with our customers and prospects. And As Nick mentioned, we have kind of a similar flow here in our process, and really the goal of cloud and next generation data center is to make this all very seamless and very easy. I can spin things up, I can tear things down, really automate and orchestrate across the organization. I always call that the promise of cloud. The promise is if I want to spin up a new service, I can do that in typically a matter of minutes, maybe an hour or so. But when we go from the perception to the reality across a different organization, typically it's a disjointed process because we have different people doing different things. So for example, I have the server virtualization team who's responsible for the applications and the services and the servers, and they'll do, like, for example, the storage and the compute. They own that component. But then the networking team typically owns things like IP addressing and DNS. And how do you handle this? And for a lot of organizations, it's really multiple handoffs. Nick used a different kind of graphic for this, but it's different teams having different aspects and different controls, and how do you deal with this? And typically there's two ways of doing it. For example, we think about an IP address. One is you can open a trouble ticket or do a request, and assuming the networking person is there and assuming they have information, they have the next available IP, they can follow that process up and go back and forth. But in reality, most of us aren't sitting around waiting for a request to come in from a networking perspective, so they get to it later. So while the process itself or the task isn't that complex, it's our day-to-day jobs which tends to make this go much longer. And when we talk to different customers and I ask the difference between the perception and the reality, so I asked the question, for example, how long does it take you to get a service request in till it's actually up and available, including IP addressing, including DNS? Most people typically measure that in days or weeks, and they have SLAs along that process. And again, that really goes against the promise of cloud, the promise of agility. And again, why this is a common challenge is we're doing all these great new next generation cloud capabilities, virtualization capabilities, but a lot of times I'm still doing it on my traditional infrastructure. Maybe I'm using Bind, maybe I'm using Microsoft, maybe I'm using those spreadsheets that Nick talked about for managing IP addresses. This was painful enough in a traditional physical world. It got more painful in a virtualized world, and when I go to cloud, it becomes almost impossible because I have so many different manual processes and I don't have the integrations to really automate the process. So while companies like VMware might do a fantastic job of doing storage and compute spin-up, I still need these different manual tasks from these core network services. And that's really what Infoblox is known for, and what we fit in is giving you what we call Enterprise-Grade DDI. That stands for DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. So instead of using freeware or trying to have smart people figure out Bind and keep up to date with all the patches and everything else, we have secure physical and virtual appliances purpose-built to do this. So again, we're not doing freeware, we're doing these purpose-built appliances because DNS is critical. Typically things like DNS and IP addressing isn't the sexiest thing you think about, but if you don't have DNS, for example, what works? Typically nothing. So again, we focus on giving you an enterprise-grade solution to make sure everything is working along the way, integrated across the board. So I have a complete, integrated, consistent solution for IP addressing, DNS, DHCP, and then add a lot more network automation, templates, wizards, attributes to really take advantage of some of these key capabilities that Nick's going to show you a demo of coming up in a minute, but leveraging all these different challenges. So again, just to kind of set where Infoblox fits in case you don't know much about us, again, we sit in the core network service space, the market-wide leader for DNS, DHCP, authoritative IPAM, always on, always available capabilities to handle those core services. We also focus a lot on secure DNS. Today's webinar is not focusing on that, but I wanted to at least bring this to your attention because one of the biggest challenges that we see in organizations today is DNS is the #1 threat vector from security. Why? Because you leave everything wide open. You allow all the traffic to go across DNS and it can be exploited for either its malware or DDoS attacks. And by serving up DNS and being the authoritative DNS capability, we have a unique perspective to identify and stop some of those challenges. And then finally, what we're really focusing on today is kind of the cloud network automation. take the foundation, what we've done historically, DNS, IP address management, for example, and automate that and integrate that with partners like VMware, integrate that with leading providers like Ahead to build that complete solution. And then I have a centralized management interface to really solve all this across my entire organization. And again, today we're going to use VMware as our example when we walk through the demo. As I mentioned, you might use ESX for compute and storage, and then I'll use some vRealize automation and orchestration. And what Infoblox is really doing is we're fitting that gap. So instead of doing manual processes, requesting an IP address, manually provisioning a DNS record, we're really automating that to fit within your automation, within your orchestration capabilities. And our goal is to get to that zero-touch deployment. Take away the weights, take away the manual processes. Again, a lot of this isn't rocket science. The task itself is. The big challenge is typically getting the right person with the right expertise to do that task when you need it. And again, that's why the time tends to spread out and become much longer for different organizations. And where Infoblox is going to fit in, and again, we do the demo coming up, we're going to fit in with the provisioning, the managing, the retiring from an IP addressing and a DNS host record perspective. And again, having partners like Ahead becomes very important to us because Ahead understands the entire cloud platform and what you need to do across the board, and Infoblox is just a critical component within that, and really trying to help solve some of these challenges to eliminate the handoffs, to eliminate those different manual processes. And we have the demo coming up. You'll see this in action, but really what we're doing is we built API integrations with partners like VMware to automate a lot of these processes for you. So instead of having you go out and try to figure it out and build your own, we've done a lot of adapters from different platforms to save time, to save money, to automate these different tasks across your organizations so I can spin it up in my goal of cloud, seconds and minutes, not hours, days, or weeks. As I wrap up before I turn it back over to Nick for the demo, one thing I wanted to focus on is today we're going to talk about the integration we do with VMware. As we heard about earlier, most of us are going to a hybrid world where I have traditional on-prem environments, I might have virtualized environments, I might be doing private cloud, might be doing public cloud along the way, and Infoblox can help across the board when it comes to DNS, DHCP, IP address management, automation, across these different platforms. So again, we might use VMware as an example, but it can also be extended out to Amazon, Microsoft, OpenStack, for example. So I have a single unified solution and management interface across my hybrid cloud, across my on-premise environment to make it very simple, very easy. Also, a lot of the cloud-based discovery and visibility. You know, a lot of the challenges that we see across organizations is I have different platforms. I have my VMware administrator, I have my AWS platform, I have OpenStack views, but my network guys need view this information as well for troubleshooting and compliance. Well, now you can automate that discovery of the VMs, of the virtual instances to have that complete visibility across your organization, and then do these automation tasks for common jobs. Again, today's webinar is going to focus on VMware, but we can do it very easily across these other platforms as well. And then finally, having consistency becomes very important for availability, for compliance, for auditing, because you want your VMware world to look like AWS, look like on-prem. And by having that single platform, we can do that to ensure consistency from your network policies across the entire enterprise. And this is just kind of an interface view of some of the things that we're doing from the discovery components coming up. You'll see a little bit of this on the demo, but I just wanted to reinforce the ability to see these virtual machines on a single consolidated interface. So I can see my traditional physical devices as well as my virtual devices, my virtual machines and instances as well, and then track them over time. So if I tear one down, I can still have the visibility to see it, to follow it after the fact, and see exactly what's happening from an audit, compliance, troubleshooting point of view. And what we're doing as an organization, Infoblox, and by partnering with Ahead and people like VMware is we're really trying to extend our industry-leading solution we're known for from DNS, DHCP, IP address management out to the cloud world. So again, the agility, the promise of speed from a cloud perspective, if you still have spreadsheets for IP addresses, if you're still manually provisioning DNS, you don't have the agility. You're increasing that time to deploy, and Infoblox can help shrink that. Also, the multi-platform. This is a big thing to think about. People tend not to think about this until after the fact, and it becomes a problem later. But how do I keep consistency? How do I do this across multiple platforms as I go to a hybrid world? And also have the visibility to see what's happening, to see what's going on, to make it very simple across your organization, and really, again, extend that out to meet the different needs across your organization. I'm going to turn it back over to Nick to take control back over and bring up the demo here. And again, as we talked about before, as Chelsea mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. You can type them in anytime throughout today's presentation, and we'll answer the questions after the call. I'll turn it back over to you.
Matt. Cool, awesome. Let's just wait for the ball there. Can you pass the ball to me, Matt? Or Chelsea? Okay, got it there. Okay, so yeah, onto the demo. So the very first thing, I thought we'd just cover is, how would you do this manually, right? How would you go into Infoblox and add something like a host record? A lot of people still want to do static IPs on their servers, but they don't want to, kind of wait for that IP address, that DNS request, that ticket to go in. And so how does, Infoblox and VMware kind of help make that happen? So first thing is you kind of log in, to Infoblox. This is me logged into what they call the Infoblox Grid Manager. You'll see a bunch of normal IPAM tasks like add hosts. And a lot of what we're looking at here really is what comes into the data management section. The cloud management section, as you saw in the PowerPoint, there is really kind of the discovery, so it will kind of pull up your assets. What we're going to focus on here is really around kind of the automation. How do you automatically get assets and make use of the Infoblox grid that's available to you? So in this demo, we've got an IP scheme. So we've got a 10.125.0 network /24, and then we've created in our DNS section here, Infoblox test.local for this webinar. And so now if I go to the right-hand side in the toolbar, I can hit add host here. And very quickly kind of put in here, okay, I already know that I want to do Infoblox test.local, because that's the only zone we've got in here that it's authoritative for. But I'm going to put in here, webinar test. I'm just going to start at number 20 because I know I've been doing a bunch of tests before this. So that's kind of the name of the DNS, entry I want to put in there. And then I want to get the next available IP address. So I click this little plus sign over here, get next available IP. It asks me what network. In this case, I'm going to put in the 10.125.0 network. So for it to pop up there, there we go. So it's got an IP address, 10.125.3 is the next available IP in that subnet. So I hit save and close, and that's it. So that's created my host entry and my reserved that IP address all at the same time. So obviously we don't want people having to go in here every time as part of our cloud provisioning to go and do this task. And this is what I really love about Infoblox personally, is just the rich APIs, because we're going to do this in VMware Orchestrator, but this could be done in any of the orchestration tools that we work with as well. One of the key things, though, just from Infoblox right out of the box, is when you install that plugin, they give you this IPAM section in vRealize Orchestrator that contains all of these workflows. And I'm going to go through a few of those here for you today. But it's all there ready to go. They've got integrations with vRealize automation, great documentation, so this is very easy to kind of set up yourself. But if we wanted to do kind of the exact same task, we could run this workflow, reserve an IP in network, which is basically what we did there. So I'm just going to run the previous one to save me typing all the information in again. But I'll show you, it will actually show you all the information we typed in on the previous run I did. So I'll just give that a second to pop up the presentation. So, now we're looking at the IPAM server. So this is my Infoblox grid master there. Here is the network. Again, I could type in, I could choose a different network subnet if we had that available. Here's my sitter, 24 again. Hit next here. We'll see the last test I did earlier today was, Infoblox test 04. So I'm going to change that here for a live test. So we're doing webinar test 21. Gonna spell correctly, bear with me. Webinar test 21.infoblox test.local. And I'm going to go ahead and submit that. I'll put a comment in there as well, which will show up in Infoblox. And then these other pieces here called extensible attributes that I'm going to talk about at the end. But I think that's another kind of unique feature where you can kind of automatically select subnets based on tags and things like that. But saying that, so now I've got this workflow, webinar test 21, I just hit submit, and now I've created this workflow, and it's going to go and talk to Infoblox. There it goes. It's created the IPAM connection, and it's added the host. So now if we go back over to our grid master, refresh here, we should see that that entry has been added. So yeah, we've got webinar test 21. And you can do that over and over again. You can integrate that workflow into various products that you have. With that though, one thing I would show though is, you're not necessarily going to want to go and type in, if we look at the workflow and all of the inputs, there's a lot of inputs here in the workflow. And one of the things we do a lot at Ahead is something we call wrap in or box in, where we take a workflow and we preset a lot of the values, or we find a different way to make those decisions. So if we kind of go up here under the Infoblox webinar section that I'm clicking, Head Aviation IP reserve. Head Aviation, by the way, is our fictitious company in the lab. Everything we model is around this airline company that we create here. But if I run this one, so Head Aviation IP reserve, I hit start workflow here, and you see it's only asking me, for the host name and the environment I want to put it in. So if we do webinar test, we'll do 22.infoblox test.local. I can choose my environment. I've actually in this demo preset, doesn't matter which environment you choose, it's going to pick the same subnet. But I can basically wrap that workflow inside my own one. I've built that logic now, so I can do webinar test 22, hit submit, and that's going to go off, and we've added that entry. So I'll go back to my grid master, do a refresh here. That's added there. And so how do we do that? If we go into this workflow, if we look at the schema for it, we basically put in a scriptable task for network selection. If I open this up, I've got some scripting in here, and I'm saying, okay, the environment is dev, my net address is this one, my SID is this one. And you can create, a workflow or configuration elements. There's a number of ways we carve this out, to say that, depending on what the user selects up front, it will select the environment. At the same time, when I mentioned the extensible attributes earlier on as well, those are also things that you can expose into vRealize automation into VRO. And actually in the Infoblox grid, go and assign, certain tags to your subnets. And that allows you to say, okay, I'm going to use, this subnet whenever this tag comes across. And that's another great way to do it, because you don't really want to ask these questions to your user. No one cares about, is it the 10.1.25.0 network? They want to go in the dev network. And maybe you have 3 or 4 of these. How do you deal with it when one gets full and then it starts populating the next one? That's where these features become really, really useful for you. But ultimately what we've done here is we've taken the Infoblox workflow that you see on the right-hand side here, put it inside of this workflow we call a Head Aviation-IP reserve, put this network selection script in front, and all the other things that we know are static in our general attribute tab, we basically hard set, all those questions that were being asked in the Infoblox workflow, which is great. We want that customization from Infoblox, but now we've got to tailor it and customize it for the business. And that's how you get you can use this over and over again to add hosts, all day long. With that said, how would I take something like that now and get it into vRealize automation? So if I go back over to a web browser here, we've got vRealize automation up here. I've got a catalog of services here, and ultimately I want to use Infoblox as part of this. I don't necessarily want to use VMware's built-in IP management scheme there, because that's really only covering vRealize workloads. It's not telling me what's going on in my entire environment. And so what we can do is, we've got a blueprint here for Windows 2008 R2 that I've modified. And the way before you can even modify it, the way you get the Infoblox pieces in there is through what we call build profiles. So if we go back over to the infrastructure tab here, there's a build profile that we've created here, and it's called Infoblox IPAM. And if you look at this, if you open it up, we'll edit it up, and you'll see it looks largely the same, because it is basically the vRealize orchestrator variables being passed along. And we mentioned earlier on those different phases, of life cycle events that happen, where there's request approve, build, destroy, etc. And so in this example, what we've used here, and this is in vRealize Automation 6.2.1, we've used the building machine, the machine disposing, and the machine provisioned life cycle events to hand off to vRealize orchestrator workflows. These are the workflow IDs that come from Infoblox that get put there, and all of these variables. Now, the question you might be asking was, well, do I really want to go and add all these properties? This seems like an area where I could get stuck. I might mess this up. And that's a great point. And one of the things I love about what Infoblox have done here, if we go to the build profile sections of VCAC, is they've created all this for you. So all I had to do that was run this workflow, which is create build profile for reserve and IP for VCAC, VM, and network, and that adds all of those pieces for you. It puts all the integration stubs into effect for you. So it's nothing you have to maintain. You just run this workflow, and it's going to talk to your vRealize automation environment and add all of that for you. Then what you need to do is you go back to vRealize automation. We've got this build profile now for Infoblox IPAM, and again, I could do more customizations here. I could offer user input here where I want to prompt somebody. Again, I could offer a drop-down menu for dev stage QA. I could tie that to a dev blueprint. There's multiple ways you can carve this out. But ultimately, when you're done, you can go to your blueprints. So if I head over to my blueprint section again, and I'll just pull up the one of the Windows blueprints here, so Windows 2008. Data center one here, and what you can look at in here is what's called these the property section, and this is where you apply the build profiles. Now in vRealize Automation 7, they're called property groups, but they operate in largely the same way. However, we don't necessarily use the stubs anymore. We use what we call event subscriptions, so that's a bit of an advancement from VMware, where it works more like a message bus, but the idea is exactly the same. At a certain event in the life cycle, I'm going to hand over to a workflow. And to assign a build profile, literally all I have to do is come in here and check it, and it's going to get those properties, or I can choose to override those properties when that blueprint gets built. And I can go and request one of these now. I can kind of show you the handoff as it kind of hits VRO if we've still got time at the end here. But I'll just submit a blueprint request, and you can see in here as well. We do other things too, like rubric SLA domain. We can add additional properties for gold, silver, bronze. We've got a lot of demos we can do just around these integrations if anyone's interested in seeing them. But I'll go ahead and submit that one now. What we'll see, as we're in vRealize Orchestrator here in a little while, is one of these workflows kick off, from VCAC to reserve an IP address, and that's basically the vRealize automation that you'll see kind of kick off here after this one and reserve an IP shortly. And so that's kind of how we integrate with vRealize automation. You kind of saw the disposing stub there as well. And so that's a question, well, how does disposal work, and how do I get to that? And ultimately, that's in the same way. There's another workflow here already pre-built for removing a host record, and so I can run this workflow, and again, I'll just pick a previous one here in case there's a lot of inputs to fill in, but I don't believe there's many for this one if I recall correctly. Yep, so I just got my IPAM server, and yeah, I just got to type in, my DNS name of my node. So we'll do, it was 22 was the last one we did. I'll hit submit there, and then we'll go over back to Infoblox in a second, and we should see that that's been removed from there. So yeah, that's completed. If I go over to the grid, go over to DNS again, let's just refresh. I've got 22 there. If I refresh that now, you can see that's gone. And so vRealize Orchestrator has basically removed that node entry there. The other thing to look at, while we're in the grid, is just in the IPAM view. It'll show you kind of the network as well, and you can kind of get a sense. If I click this network here, I can see this kind of map, if you will. Of just what's used, what's got a DNS object assigned to it. Very easy, and with the discovery tools built in, it'll go out and kind of catalog everything and put it in there for you, which is great. So with that said, going back to the demos, I kind of touched on demo 1 and 2 already there. One of the things that, after retirement, one of the things we always get asked is, well, I'm not just going to retire records during the day without somebody approving it, and how do I get around that? I've got to put change controls in for these things, and, we totally agree. That's, one of the big benefits of using something like, vRealize Orchestrator and any of the orchestration tools to do this, is that you can integrate with your change control system. So the idea being, and I went through this, with my previous 2 companies before I came to AHEAD, was ultimately around, what do I have to do to prove out to the change approval board that this is safe? And so you can kind of say, okay, I'm going to run this in my development environment. I'm going to prove out that this workflow is safe. Maybe I add a ping check or a DNS check, additional server name check in there, before I even run the Infoblox workflow. And then to go a step further, to ensure, security, login, audit, and all that, I can integrate with ServiceNow as well. So we have a whole bunch of workflows, for our ServiceNow integration. And this is one that I'm just going to show you that basically just runs a change control. And so if I run this workflow by itself, just as a ServiceNow workflow for a change order that was kind of preset, and I go over to, ServiceNow. So I've just run that workflow for ServiceNow. I go over to ServiceNow, just refresh here. I'll go on the left, I'll go to the change section, I'll type it in here. And I go scroll down to my change list, I can look at my change dashboard. You can see there's a change order that just got created. I'll log into it here. Looking at the time, it's in the wrong time zone here, but you can see executed via vRealize Orchestrator build. And that's a change that just got created from the workflow. Now what I can do, if I go back to vRealize Orchestrator, I can take the workflow that I created with the wrapper, with that network selection in there. I can take my ServiceNow workflow, and I can ultimately combine them. So again, if I edit this workflow, you'll see here, we've got a workflow for reserving IP, we've got our network selection. All we've done is we've dropped in the ServiceNow workflow into this master workflow that's wrapping everything together. If we wanted to as well, we can pass the IP, we can pass the information. In this demo, I haven't got that here. But that's definitely, something you can do. And one of the things we often do is we create these, change orders with all of the information from the build process in there. So, we might take every property, every system, backup, monitoring, agents, how I configure my Puppet node, and we'll write a change control when we build the system for all the systems affected, all the CIs affected, and, basically log all that information, update the CMDB, do all those tasks as well. It's just a huge part of it. And so if I kind of run that again, if I go up to this one, Head Aviation IP Reserve with ServiceNow, now I can right-click, run this, and again we'll choose, we'll go up to Webinar Test 23 here, again for our dev environment. What it's going to do is reserved an IP, let that piece go through, and it's created a change control, and that ran in, looks like, just under 2 seconds there. So if we go back over to ServiceNow, our last change was number 80. We'll just go back here, and we've got 81, and we can see this was an Infoblox automated IPAM change executed via vRealize Orchestrator build. And, all this can be customized. Ultimately, we're trying to reduce complexity, reduce handoffs, and if change control is the biggest handoff to implementing something like this, like DNS changes during the day, retirement of objects during the day, this is one of the mechanisms that that we can basically use to get around that. And so that's what I really wanted to cover from a demo standpoint. We can kind of go back over to vRealize Orchestrator here, and we probably see that last run should have happened by now. So yeah, we can see 1239, reserved an IP for that server that we're building. So I don't want to bore everybody with a Windows sysprep right now, but obviously that server's building, and we'll use that IP address that came from Infoblox. So I'll pause there, and let me kind of hand back to Q&A here at this point. So
thanks so much, and thank you to both of our speakers, Nick and Matt. That presentation was really great. We've got a few questions that came in during the webinar. If you have some questions that you didn't get to submit, feel free to do so now using the chat feature on the WebEx dashboard. But I will begin, and then Nick and Matt, you guys can kind of decide who you want to answer these. The first question we have is, how is the VMware integration piece priced for Infoblox?
Yeah, Matt, I'm going to let you take that one.
I appreciate that. I like the easy ones for me here. So all the integrations we are doing with VMware and other platforms like OpenStack or AWS are actually adapters or integrations to APIs, and there's no official charge for those. So as long as you're an Infoblox customer using us for DNS, DHCP, and IP address management, you can use the appropriate adapter coming through, and then you can build that, and you can just add the adapter with no charge that does the API integrations. I did see another question come through on the chat feature asking about a compatibility matrix between Infoblox and the plugins or the adapters. With that, we have different adapters based on which versions of code you're running, both with VMware as well as Infoblox. So if you're a customer and you want more details, I'd be glad to share that matrix with you, but we've been doing these adapters, we've been enhancing them over time that run both with now VRA, VRO, but we also had some legacy ones that worked with VCAC and VCO, for example. that we built those APIs in addition.
Yeah. I'll just add in there, what I really like is that, when I was in the grid master there, if I requested a host record and let's say I got an error message, that error message I get in the grid master is the same error message I get from the VRO workflows. And the reason for that is, Infoblox kind of uses their GUI, consumes their own, API. And so even if, if you look at the workflows, and obviously it's great because Infoblox creates all of it out the box for you. You don't have to go and start there. But even if you found an incompatibility, a lot of our customers that kind of go down this cloud automation journey are learning REST API calls as part of that. And all of those calls are exposed to you. You can change them. I've even customized some of the Infoblox workflows if and when I've needed to. But it's very easy to do because one, you've got examples, and the REST API is just extremely rich. You can even write these workflows yourself if you're just very good at writing REST. So I think it just gives you that kickstart, which is what everyone needs. And because IP is kind of often sometimes the slowest thing in the chain, or the thing you need before everything else can happen in the chain, it's great to be able to get it easily and quickly up and running.
Hey, Chelsea, I wanted to add one thing. That when Nick went through the demo, I think one thing I wanted to reinforce for those folks, Nick kind of toggled back and forth between ServiceNow and VMware and Infoblox, but a lot of this integration is done automatically kind of behind the scenes. So typically you have the server, the apps, or the services team handling the spin up like with VMware, and maybe the networking team owns the Infoblox deployment. In fact, everything he really did went through VMware. It just communicated behind the scenes, under the covers, got the IP address, got the DNS record, and automatically was done. So you don't have to be an expert on networking to do this. So even though we showed it to kind of highlight, when an IP address showed up or when it was destroyed, for example, again, it's done very easily for most people, so you can have the people doing their jobs without having to be an expert across different platforms.
Great. Is the same sort of orchestration available within ServiceNow?
Yeah, so ServiceNow has their own orchestration engine. Matt, I don't believe you guys release a ServiceNow pack. Was that available now? I know that was on the roadmap, and I haven't checked their up-to-date plugins there, but you definitely can do it with ServiceNow. Orchestration. The same REST API calls are there. It's just whether it's pre-created for you or not. Matt, I guess I'll just check with you on that one because I need an update on that.
Yeah, we do not have an official pre-approved pack or adapter for ServiceNow. The ones that we've built out of the box currently are with VMware, with OpenStack. We are now upstream as part of Liberty with OpenStack, as well as Microsoft. We also have integrations with AWS or Amazon Web Services. Not an adapter per se. It's actually doing API calls through the proxy to handle that. So those are the ones that we built out of the box working with vendors, but we've had other partners like Ahead and even customers who built other ones, other platforms like ServiceNow or IBM or Clicker or CA or even Cisco and ACI. So again, the APIs are very powerful. Really what we've done was we built some of the most common ones that we've seen from our customers out of the box. We'll continue to add more to that, but if you have specific needs, you can definitely become very flexible and build your own based on your individual requirements.
Yeah, and if that's something, people are definitely interested in seeing, I'd say at Ahead now, we're doing a significant more amount of ServiceNow orchestration than the previous years because their tools, been maturing a lot in that space. And, one of our customers is doing their entire cloud management platform and orchestration engine, entirely in ServiceNow, not using vRealize or vRealize Automation or vRealize Orchestrator. And if that's something, people are definitely, interested in seeing. It's certainly something, that we mentioned kind of our lab, the Ahead Lab and Briefing Center, which is available to our customers, and we do tailored demos and tailored integrations, and if that's something people want to see, more than happy to build that out. We take a lot of what we've done in VRO and Cisco and our other tools that we work with, and we convert them between orchestration tools all the time. So happy to entertain a conversation on that if the interest is there, and we see that growing interest.
And I'll give Ahead a plug. I mean, they're by far one of our best partners from the cloud perspective, helping build your solutions for you and help you along the way. Again, from an Infoblox perspective, we have a small component of it, but leverage partners, leverage folks like Ahead and Nick and some of the experts there to really think about what you're trying to do to build your entire cloud platform to really make it seamless and make it smooth across your organization.
Thanks for the sales plug there. I appreciate it.
It's the truth. I don't plug too often, but you guys do a fantastic job, and you really understand the space. So,
Okay, are there additional integrations possible within the solution outside what was demoed?
Yeah, I mean, the thing we haven't demoed today, and Matt, feel free to jump in after me as well, the cloud discovery is something that, we'll probably do a follow-on webinar on, particularly around, AWS integrations and, what it looks like when you integrate the vRealize automation tenant IDs and things like that as well. If people are definitely interested in seeing that, that's an area that we've done a little bit of work with customers on, where they've kind of gone into AWS. What else from the automation aspect, Matt, would you say? I mean, that's the common use cases I get, that's tailored, but any other big ones that you think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you hit the nail on the head kind of just across multiple platforms. So again, the things that we can do across public, private, and hybrid, very similar, but there's different looks and feels, different APIs associated with those. Another common use case, we focus kind of on the IP addressing. The DNS provisioning is also something else you can do a little bit more robustly within Infoblox and part of the integration and the automation component. And probably the thing we didn't touch on was kind of the cleaning up of this. We always think about kind of spinning things up and doing it quickly, but tearing them down. When I do a lot of trade shows, I talk to folks asking, when's the last time you cleaned up or you reclaimed an IP address and, went back to your spreadsheet, or you ever cleaned up a DNS record? And typically the answer is never. So it's not just spinning things up. The automation that we do can actually tear it down. We'll release the IP address. We'll still document the IP address for auditing, tracking, troubleshooting, compliance later, and then clear up the DNS record. So I think that's the other thing, in addition to visibility, that we didn't promote heavily here. But again, this is meant to give you more of a flavor of the integration, and if it's a good fit for you, whether you're a customer or not a customer today, we can definitely come out, talk to you, see what you're trying to do, and give you more details.
Yeah, and I would say the other piece is just the extensible attributes. I kind of hinted at that a little bit. Is using those to kind of define your networks, I think is really interesting. We've also done an example with a customer where we actually tagged the vCenter port group using the modern web client tagging, and that would then filter through and kind of help us decide the network. There were a number of ways that you can kind of carve this out. DHCP as well, and some of the things around DHCP reservations are, we've seen a lot of that too. I think I'll just say again, very quickly, because we want to get as many questions in, is, if there's things that you want to see, send us the list of them. I think, if we want to do another webinar where we kind of skip some of the PowerPoint and just do a 30-minute deep dive on those technologies, happy to do it. Obviously, these things take time to prep, but, if we know the demand is there, I'm more than happy to set those things up in the lab and showcase them.
Great. I think we're almost out of time for questions, but if you guys have any additional questions, feel free to email Matt or Nick. Matt's email is mgowarty@infoblox.com, and Nick is nick.colyer@thinkahead.com. And lastly, we just want to discuss the Looking Ahead event that we are hosting in June in Chicago. And, if you're interested in learning more about building your hybrid cloud or automation orchestration, feel free to attend. It's free for technology industry gurus and people just generally interested in technology. This is an annual event that we host focused around relationships to drive innovation in your enterprise, knowledge, and resources. So if you're interested, please go to www.thinkahead.com/looking-ahead-2016 to register. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chelsea.
Thanks, everyone.